I am Ellie, 32 years old, standing before two tiny white caskets that hold my baby boys. The funeral home is silent, except for muffled sobs and whispers. I feel the accusing stares from my husband's family burning into my back. My mother-in-law, Electra, moves from person to person, whispering, then looking at me with manufactured pity. Nobody knows the truth until my 7-year-old daughter tugs on the pastor's robe. What she says next changes everything. If you are watching this video, please let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us the most. Before I met Lucien, I had a promising career in graphic design. I was 25, ambitious, and climbing the ladder at a creative agency in Denver. My days were filled with client presentations, brainstorming sessions, and after work, drinks with my creative team. I had a cozy apartment in the arts district, a tight circle of friends, and dreams of eventually launching my own design studio. Romance wasn't exactly at the top of my priority list back then. I met Lucien at a gallery opening featuring emerging digital artists. He was tall, with piercing green eyes, and this confident smile that made me feel instantly drawn to him. That night, we talked for hours about everything from our travel bucket lists to childhood dreams. Lucien was successful too, a financial advisor with his own practice. He was articulate, driven, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my creative work and ambitions. What I didn't realize then was that Lucien was an only child who had been absolutely worshipped by his mother his entire life. Electra had raised him alone after his father abandoned them when Lucien was just 6 years old. Their relationship seemed endearing at first, the way he'd call her every other day, and how she'd practically glow with pride whenever she talked about him. Our relationship moved fast. Within 8 months, we were discussing marriage. Lucien proposed during a weekend getaway to Aspen, and I was over the moon. That was when I first noticed something troubling about his relationship with his mother. Before even calling my parents, Lucien called Electra. He put her on speaker, and her first response wasn't congratulations or excitement for us. Instead, she said, "Did you use grandmother's ring like we discussed?" Not joy for our engagement, not welcoming me to the family, but concern about whether her input had been followed. The wedding planning revealed more red flags that I chose to ignore at the time. Electra had strong opinions about literally everything, from my dress to the flowers to the reception venue. When I selected a bohemian-style gown that felt authentically me, she sent me links to more traditional options, saying Lucien deserved to see his bride looking appropriately elegant. When I chose wildflower arrangements for the tables, she pushed for formal white roses because they were more sophisticated for such an important occasion. Lucien always played mediator with the same tired refrain. "Mom just wants our day to be perfect, babe. She's been dreaming about my wedding since I was little." To keep the peace and avoid drama, I compromised on way too many things. The wedding ended up being bigger than I wanted, more formal than felt like us. The whole thing designed more to impress guests than celebrate our love story. But I convinced myself it was worth it to start our marriage without family conflict hanging over us. After our honeymoon in Italy, the real problems started surfacing. Electra would visit our new house and immediately start rearranging things, claiming she knew how Lucien likes his space organized. She'd criticize my cooking, often showing up with elaborate meals because Lucien needs proper nutrition to maintain his energy for work. She even made comments about my housekeeping, running her finger along surfaces and sighing dramatically when she found any dust. Lucien never saw this as problematic behavior. "Mom just wants to help out," he'd say, or "She raised me on her own after Dad left. She just wants to stay connected to my life." I tried so hard to be understanding, to see it from his perspective. but the constant criticism and interference was slowly wearing me down. Instead, she immediately took control, instructing the nurses about how the baby should be positioned and questioning the pediatrician about every single detail of Mila's care. She practically moved into my hospital room, only leaving when visiting hours officially ended. She dominated every moment with Mila, often taking her right out of my arms while saying things like, "Let me show you the proper way to support her head and neck." When I tried to establish breastfeeding, she'd hover right there, offering unwanted advice and somehow making me feel completely inadequate as a new mother. When Mila had trouble latching initially, Electra made it clear she thought this was my fault somehow. Lucian saw absolutely none of this as problematic. "Mom raised me completely on her own," he'd remind me. "She knows what she's doing. You should be grateful for her help and experience." But it wasn't help, it was control, and it was systematically undermining my confidence as Mila's mother from day one. When we brought Mila home, Electra visited every single day. She questioned every decision I made, from the temperature of the nursery to the brand of diapers I chose. When Mila would cry, Electra would immediately swoop in, taking her from me and saying things like, "She needs her grandmother's touch." As Mila grew, the situation only got worse. Electra disagreed with my approach to introducing solid foods, my decision to return to work part-time, and even how I dressed my daughter. She'd bring over clothes I had specifically decided against, and toys that weren't age-appropriate. When I tried to establish boundaries, she'd tear up and tell Lucian I was keeping her from her only grandchild. Lucian and I started arguing more and more frequently. He couldn't understand why I couldn't just get along with his mother. He accused me of being oversensitive and ungrateful. Our once solid partnership began fracturing under the weight of his mother's constant presence and his unwavering loyalty to her. By the time Mila was 4, I was walking on eggshells in my own home. I second-guessed every parenting decision, knowing it would be scrutinized and criticized. Lucian and I were more like roommates than partners, with Electra always there between us, the invisible third person in our marriage. When Mila was 4 years old, I discovered I was pregnant again. Morning sickness hit me like a truck, and initially I thought it was just a stomach bug. After a week of constant nausea, I took a home pregnancy test. The positive result filled me with such mixed emotions. I was happy about expanding our family, but terrified about how another child would affect the already delicate balance in our home. When I told Lucian, his first reaction was happiness, quickly followed by concern about our finances. "Another child means we'll need to restructure our budget significantly," he said, immediately pulling out his phone to start calculating additional expenses. I knew he'd be a devoted father, but his practical response lacked the emotional connection I was desperately craving. At my first prenatal appointment, the ultrasound revealed a surprise that left me completely speechless. 2 heartbeats. Twins. The technician pointed at the screen, showing me 2 distinct little forms growing inside me. I laughed and cried at the same time, completely overwhelmed by the news. Lucian seemed stunned when I told him, managing a weak smile and saying, "Wow, 2 at once. That'll be efficient." Then he immediately called his mother. Electra's reaction was absolutely over the top. She showed up at our house within an hour, bursting through the front door with shopping bags from multiple baby stores. "Twins!" she exclaimed, hugging Lucian first, then giving me this quick, almost obligatory embrace. "This is absolutely wonderful. Twins run in our family, you know. My great-grandmother's sisters were twins." As my pregnancy progressed, Electra inserted herself even more aggressively into our lives. She started researching everything about twin pregnancies and bombarded me with information and constant warnings. "Twin pregnancies are high risk," she'd remind me daily. "You need to be extra careful about everything." When I was 5 months pregnant, Electra dropped her biggest bombshell yet. "I've been thinking," she announced during our usual Sunday dinner at our house, "after the twins are born, I should move in temporarily to help, at least for the first few months." My fork literally froze halfway to my mouth. That's very generous of you," I said carefully, "but we'll manage fine. I've already arranged for extended maternity leave." Electra shook her head dismissively.
You have absolutely no idea how difficult twins will be. One baby was challenging enough for you with Mila. Two will be impossible, especially with a toddler running around demanding attention.
The day Mila was born was both the most wonderful and most stressful day of my life up to that point. After 16 hours of labor, I was completely exhausted, but so happy to finally hold my beautiful daughter. Electra showed up at the hospital literally minutes after Lucien called her, and she barely acknowledged what I'd just been through. Instead, she immediately took control, instructing the nurses about how the baby should be positioned and questioning the pediatrician about every single detail of Mila's care. She practically moved into my hospital room, only leaving when visiting hours officially ended. She dominated every moment with Mila, often taking her right out of my arms while saying things like, "Let me show you the proper way to support her head and neck." When I tried to establish breastfeeding, she'd hover right there, offering unwanted advice and somehow making me feel completely inadequate as a new mother. When Mila had trouble latching initially, Electra made it clear she thought this was my fault somehow. Lucien saw absolutely none of this as problematic. "Mom raised me completely on her own," he'd remind me. "She knows what she's doing. You should be grateful for her help and experience." But it wasn't help. It was control, and it was systematically undermining my confidence as Mila's mother from day one. When we brought Mila home, Electra visited every single day. She questioned every decision I made, from the temperature of the nursery to the brand of diapers I chose. When Mila would cry, Electra would immediately swoop in, taking her from me and saying things like, "She needs her grandmother's touch." As Mila grew, the situation only got worse. Electra disagreed with my approach to introducing solid foods, my decision to return to work part-time, and even how I dressed my daughter. She'd bring over clothes I had specifically decided against and toys that weren't age-appropriate. When I tried to establish boundaries, she'd tear up and tell Lucien I was keeping her from her only grandchild. Lucien and I started arguing more and more frequently. He couldn't understand why I couldn't just get along with his mother. He accused me of being oversensitive and ungrateful. Our once solid partnership began fracturing under the weight of his mother's constant presence and his unwavering loyalty to her. By the time Mila was 4, I was walking on eggshells in my own home. I second-guessed every parenting decision, knowing it would be scrutinized and criticized. Lucien and I were more like roommates than partners, with Electra always there between us, the invisible third person in our marriage. When Mila was 4 years old, I discovered I was pregnant again. Morning sickness hit me like a truck, and initially I thought it was just a stomach bug. After a week of constant nausea, I took a home pregnancy test. The positive result filled me with such mixed emotions. I was happy about expanding our family, but terrified about how another child would affect the already delicate balance in our home. When I told Lucien, his first reaction was happiness, quickly followed by concern about our finances. "Another child means we'll need to restructure our budget significantly," he said, immediately pulling out his phone to start calculating additional expenses. I knew he'd be a devoted father, but his practical response lacked the emotional connection I was desperately craving. At my first prenatal appointment, the ultrasound revealed a surprise that left me completely speechless. 2 heartbeats. Twins. The technician pointed at the screen, showing me 2 distinct little forms growing inside me. I laughed and cried at the same time, completely overwhelmed by the news. Lucien seemed stunned when I told him, managing a weak smile and saying, "Wow, 2 at once. That'll be efficient." Then he immediately called his mother. Electra's reaction was absolutely over the top. She showed up at our house within an hour, bursting through the front door with shopping bags from multiple baby stores. "Twins!" she exclaimed, hugging Lucien first, then giving me this quick, almost obligatory embrace. "This is absolutely wonderful. Twins run in our family, you know. My great-grandmother's sisters were twins."
As my pregnancy progressed, Electra inserted herself even more aggressively into our lives. She started researching everything about twin pregnancies and bombarded me with information and constant warnings. Twin pregnancies are high risk. You need to be extra careful about everything. When I was 5 months pregnant, Electra dropped her biggest bombshell yet. "I've been thinking," she announced, during our usual Sunday dinner at our house. "After the twins are born, I should move in temporarily to help, at least for the first few months." My fork literally froze halfway to my mouth. "That's very generous of you," I said carefully, "but we'll manage fine. I've already arranged for extended maternity leave." Electra shook her head dismissively. "You have absolutely no idea how difficult twins will be. One baby was challenging enough for you with Mila. Two will be impossible, especially with a toddler running around demanding attention." Lucian jumped in before I could respond. He said, "Let's discuss this later," but I could tell from his expression that he thought his mother's suggestion had serious merit. As my pregnancy advanced, Lucian started working increasingly long hours. He claimed it was to save money for the twins' expenses, but I suspected he was avoiding the growing tension at home. Our conversations became brief and functional, centered around schedules and household tasks, rather than any real emotional connection. One evening, while tucking Mila into bed, she asked me a question that absolutely broke my heart. "Mommy, why does Grandma Electra say you don't know how to be a good mommy?" I froze, trying to control my facial expression. "Did Grandma say that directly to you, sweetheart?" Mila nodded her head, her innocent eyes wide. "She told Mrs. Roberts next door that you need lots of help because you don't know how to take care of babies properly." I kissed her forehead and assured her that sometimes adults say things they shouldn't and that I love her more than anything in the world. But inside, I was absolutely seething. Electra wasn't just undermining me to my face, she was talking badly about me to neighbors and even involving my own child in her toxic behavior. When I confronted Lucien about this, he defended his mother as usual. "She's just concerned about you, and honestly, twins will be incredibly challenging. Maybe we should seriously consider her offer to help out." At 34 weeks, I went into premature labor. The contraction started suddenly while I was grocery shopping at Target. By the time Lucien met me at the hospital, I was already 5 centimeters dilated. The doctors tried everything to stop the labor, but the twins were determined to make their early arrival. After a relatively quick delivery, Ethan and Eli were born tiny but fighters, each weighing just over 4 pounds. They were immediately rushed to the NICU, their little bodies connected to monitors and breathing tubes. Instead of holding my newborn sons, I watched them through incubator walls, my heart breaking at seeing them struggle for every breath. I had to stay in the hospital for 6 days due to complications, and the twins remained in the NICU for 3 weeks. During this entire time, Electra took complete charge at home. Without even asking my permission, she moved into our guest room to take care of Mila and prepare for the twins' homecoming.
When I was finally discharged, Lucien drove me home while the twins remained hospitalized. Walking into my own house felt like entering a stranger's home. Electra had completely rearranged our furniture, cleaned out my entire pantry, and replaced my food with her preferred brands, and totally redone the nursery I had so carefully prepared for months. "I hope you don't mind," she said, though her tone made it clear she couldn't care less whether I minded or not. "I made some necessary improvements. The nursery layout wasn't practical for twins at all." My carefully chosen woodland animal theme had been completely replaced with a nautical design I absolutely hated. The comfortable nursing chair I had specifically selected was gone, replaced by this stiff wooden rocker that Electra preferred. Even the cribs had been rearranged, no longer positioned the way I had so thoughtfully planned. Mila seemed different too, more subdued, clinging to me when I walked through the door. Later, she whispered that Grandma Electra had changed her bedtime routine, switched her favorite foods, and even packed away some of her beloved toys because they were
too babyish for a big sister. Lucien saw absolutely nothing wrong with any of this. Mom has been absolutely amazing, he said. I honestly don't know how we would have managed without her being here. When the twins finally came home, they required around-the-clock intensive care. Both boys had jaundice and needed special feeding schedules every 2 hours. Ethan had slight breathing issues that required constant monitoring, and Eli struggled to gain weight despite our best efforts. Electra immediately established herself as the ultimate expert on everything. I can see these boys will need extra attention, she declared with this air of authority. It's definitely a good thing I'm here to help. When I tried to establish any kind of feeding routine, Electra would immediately interfere. When I wanted to simply hold my babies, she often had them first, monopolizing every precious moment. She criticized my swaddling technique, my burping methods, even how I changed their diapers. Nothing I did was ever good enough. One evening, as I was trying to calm a crying Eli, Electra swooped in and literally took him from my arms. Let me show you how it's actually done, she said with this condescending tone. Some women just don't have the natural maternal touch with babies. I was too exhausted to fight back effectively. The twins were not easy babies by any stretch. They rarely slept at the same time, and when one finally stopped crying, the other would immediately start. I was still healing from the delivery, trying desperately to produce enough milk for 2 hungry babies, and constantly worried about their health and development. A week after the twins came home, Electra made her ultimate power move. I've decided to stay for at least 6 months, she announced at dinner, like it was already decided. Clearly, you need extensive help, and these boys need their grandmother's expertise. I looked to Lucien, expecting him to at least discuss this major decision with me privately first. Instead, he immediately nodded in agreement. That would be fantastic, Mom. We definitely need all the help we can get right now. I felt like I was drowning, losing complete control of my home, my children, and my marriage. But I was too physically and emotionally exhausted to fight back effectively. The twins demanded every single ounce of energy I had, and Electra had successfully positioned herself as absolutely essential to our family's basic functioning. As the weeks passed, I started noticing some really concerning patterns with the twins. Despite being premature babies, who should have been gradually catching up developmentally, they seemed to be falling further behind. Both boys were unusually lethargic, rarely fully alert even during feeding times. They weren't gaining weight as expected, despite consuming what seemed like adequate amounts of formula and breast milk. When I expressed my growing concerns to Lucien, he brushed me off completely. He said, all babies develop differently, and premature babies take much longer to catch up to normal milestones. But my maternal instincts were screaming that something was seriously wrong. I wanted to take them to the pediatrician immediately, but Electra completely disagreed with me. You're being absolutely paranoid, she said with this dismissive wave of her hand. I raised Lucien as a single mother, and he turned out perfectly fine. These boys just need time and consistent care, not doctors constantly poking and prodding them unnecessarily.
Lucien, as always, sided completely with his mother. Mom has way more experience with babies than both of us combined, he reminded me yet again. If she's not worried about their development, we probably don't need to be either. But I was worried. I was terrified, actually. So I scheduled an appointment with their pediatrician anyway, only to have Electra conveniently take the twins for a special grandma outing that exact morning. When I called her frantically, she claimed she had completely forgotten about the appointment and was already at the park with them. Though it was a freezing 38-degree day, hardly suitable weather for fragile premature infants. By this point, I was barely sleeping at all. The twins' erratic schedule, Mila's emotional needs, and my own postpartum recovery had left me completely exhausted. I started experiencing symptoms of severe postpartum depression, crying frequently, and feeling completely disconnected from my children and husband. You look absolutely terrible, Electra commented one morning with fake concern. Perhaps you should consider medication. Some women just can't handle motherhood naturally, and there's no shame in admitting that. What hurt the most was that Lucian seemed to completely agree with her harsh assessment of my abilities as a mother. Maybe you should talk to someone professional, he suggested, though not unkindly. Mom says postpartum depression can be really serious if left untreated. One night, after another exhausting day of feeling like a complete stranger in my own home, I had a total breakdown. The twins had been crying for hours straight, taking turns so that just as one would finally settle down, the other would immediately start wailing. I hadn't showered in 4 days, had eaten nothing but crackers and coffee, and felt like I was failing at absolutely everything that mattered. Electra found me sobbing in the nursery, desperately trying to comfort Eli while Ethan screamed in his crib nearby. Without saying a single word, she took Eli right out of my arms. "Go get some sleep," she ordered me. "I'll handle both boys tonight." I was too emotionally and physically drained to argue. "Please wake me for their 2 a.m. feeding," I said weakly. "Don't worry about it at all," Electra replied smoothly. "I have bottles already prepared. You need completely uninterrupted rest." That night, I slept for 8 straight hours, the longest stretch I'd had since before the twins were born. When I woke up with a start at 6 a.m., completely panicked about missing multiple feedings, I rushed to the nursery expecting chaos. To my absolute shock, both twins were sleeping soundly and had apparently been sleeping all night long. "How on earth did you get them to sleep through the entire night?" I asked Electra, who was already downstairs preparing breakfast for Mila. "Just a grandmother's special touch," she said with this self-satisfied smile. "Sometimes babies respond much better to experienced hands." That became the new established pattern in our house. Electra would take over complete night duty, and somehow the twins would sleep for remarkably long stretches, sometimes 10 to 12 hours straight. While I was initially grateful for the desperately needed rest, I began finding it increasingly strange that 2 premature infants with serious feeding issues were suddenly sleeping like exhausted teenagers. Is it actually normal for them to sleep this much? Shouldn't premature babies be waking up to eat more frequently than this? Lucian just shrugged dismissively. "Mom says they're just naturally good sleepers, like I was as a baby. We should be thankful and not question such a blessing." But I couldn't shake this growing unease, especially when I noticed the twins were still extremely lethargic during their limited waking hours. They weren't hitting any of the developmental milestones I read in parenting books, rarely smiled or made eye contact, and seemed perpetually drowsy even when they were supposedly awake. One afternoon, I overheard Mila talking to her stuffed unicorn in her bedroom. "Grandma Electra puts special medicine in the baby bottles," she was saying, in that innocent way children talk to their toys. "She says it helps them be really good babies and sleep like little angels." My blood literally ran cold. I knelt down beside Mila immediately. "What kind of medicine does Grandma put in their bottles, sweetheart?" Mila looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. "The white powder from her special bottle that she keeps hidden. She says it's her secret recipe for making fussy babies behave properly." I tried desperately to keep my voice steady and calm. "Have you seen her do this many times, honey?" Mila nodded, seriously. "Every single night when you go to bed early. She says never to tell you because you wouldn't understand and would just get upset for no reason." That evening, while Electra was giving the twins their bath, I searched her bedroom. I felt terrible about snooping, but my maternal instincts were screaming that something was seriously wrong. In her bedside drawer, hidden beneath a silk scarf, I found an unmarked prescription bottle. Inside were small white pills, and I could see that some of them had been crushed into a fine powder. When I confronted Electra about this discovery, she became immediately indignant and defensive. "Those are my calcium supplements," she snapped angrily, "for my osteoporosis.
I absolutely cannot believe you would snoop through my personal belongings like some kind of detective. Then why are some of them crushed into powder? I pressed. Because they're extremely large pills and difficult to swallow whole. Really, Ellie, your paranoia is getting completely out of hand. Perhaps you should seriously consider talking to a mental health professional about these trust issues you're developing. I showed the suspicious bottle to Lucian that night, my hands literally shaking. Something is very wrong here, I insisted. The twins sleep way too much, they're constantly lethargic during the day, and now I find this mysterious bottle of crushed pills. I think your mother is giving them something dangerous. He examined the bottle briefly and handed it right back to me. These are mom's supplements, Ellie. She's been taking them for years for her bone density. His voice grew cold and distant. I honestly think you're experiencing some kind of paranoia from your postpartum depression. It might be best if you see a psychiatrist as soon as possible. What about what Mila said about the powder in the bottles? I demanded. He sighed heavily, like I was being completely unreasonable. Mila is 7 years old, Ellie. She makes up elaborate stories all the time. Last week she told me there was a fairy living in her jewelry box. I felt utterly alone, completely gaslit by both my husband and his mother. With only the word of a 7-year-old child to support my growing suspicions, I began monitoring the twins much more closely, insisting on preparing their bottles myself and keeping them within my sight as much as humanly possible. Electra watched me with these narrowed, calculating eyes, but said nothing directly. Meanwhile, Lucian complained constantly that I wasn't allowing his mother to help enough. She's only here to support our family, he argued, repeatedly. You're making her feel completely unwelcomed and unappreciated after everything she's done for us. Something isn't right with the twins, I kept insisting. They're not developing normally. That's because they were born premature, Lucian countered, every single time. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any, Ellie. For several days, I managed to keep Electra completely away from the twins' bottles. During that time, they began showing significantly more alertness, cried much more frequently, especially at night, and seemed more like typical babies should. This only strengthened my growing suspicions that something had been terribly wrong. Then one night, completely exhausted from the increased nighttime wakings, I fell into an unusually deep sleep. When I woke up at dawn, I realized in horror that I hadn't heard the twins cry even once during the entire night.
Panicked, I rushed to the nursery. The door was slightly open, early morning light filtering through the blinds. Both cribs were visible from the doorway, and the twins lay motionless. Too motionless. Something primitive and maternal inside me knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. I rushed to Ethan's crib first, touching his cheek. Cold. Too cold. His lips had a bluish tint, and when I placed my hand on his chest, there was no movement at all. No, 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 I whispered desperately, lifting him from the crib. His little body was completely limp in my arms. I placed him on the floor and began CPR, the techniques I'd learned in parenting class now automatic, as my mind refused to accept what my hands already knew. After several rescue breaths and chest compressions, I ran to Eli's crib, finding him in exactly the same condition. I screamed then, a primal sound that tore from my throat, awakening Mila and bringing Electra running from her room. "Call 911!" I shouted at her, returning to Ethan while keeping an eye on Eli. "The twins aren't breathing!" Electra stood frozen in the doorway, her face completely pale. "What did you do?" she whispered. That question, in that moment, burned into my memory forever. Not, "Oh my God," or "Let me help," but "What did you do?" I ignored her, continuing CPR as I yelled again for her to call for help. Finally, she disappeared, returning moments later to say an ambulance was on the way. The next hour was a complete blur of paramedics, flashing lights, and desperate attempts to revive my sons.
They worked on both babies right there in the nursery, medical equipment and terminology flying around me as I stood pressed against the wall, Mila clutching my leg, both of us sobbing hysterically. I knew they were gone. I think I knew from that first touch of Ethan's cold cheek, but watching the paramedics confirm it officially, seeing them exchange those looks of resignation, hearing the words, "I'm sorry, we did everything we could," broke something fundamental inside me. The police arrived shortly after the paramedics, standard procedure for unexplained infant deaths. They asked questions, took detailed notes, photographed the entire nursery. They were professional but distant, treating our home like a potential crime scene, which I suppose it actually was. "When did you last check on the infants?" an officer asked me. "Around 10 last night, but my mother-in-law was handling night duty. She's been helping with overnight feeding since they came home." Electra, who had been sitting silently on the couch looking shocked, spoke up. "I checked on them at 2 a.m. for their scheduled feeding. They were perfectly fine then, sleeping peacefully like angels." The officer turned to her with his pen ready. "Did you notice anything unusual at all? Any difficulty breathing, unusual coloring, anything that seemed different?" Electra shook her head, dabbing at completely dry eyes with the tissue. "They were perfect little angels, sleeping so soundly, I didn't want to disturb their peaceful rest." Something in her tone made me look up sharply. There was a note of satisfaction beneath the manufactured grief, a hint of something that made my skin crawl with disgust.
The officer made careful notes. "We'll need formal statements from both of you, and we'll be in touch once we have the medical examiner's preliminary findings. For now, this appears to be sudden infant death syndrome, but we need to rule out all other possibilities first." After the police left, taking my babies with them in those heartbreaking small body bags, Lucian finally arrived home. He took one look at our devastated faces and collapsed in the doorway. I had never seen him cry like that. Great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. Electra was immediately at his side, cradling his head like he was still a child. "My poor boy," she murmured over and over. "My poor, poor boy." Not our poor boys, referring to the twins, not expressing sympathy for our loss as parents, just her boy, Lucian. Over the next few days, as funeral arrangements were being made and family members were notified, Electra began a subtle but incredibly persistent campaign of character assassination against me. She never directly accused me of anything, but she planted seeds of doubt with carefully chosen words and significant, meaningful looks. To Lucian's cousin, Ellie was so completely overwhelmed, barely sleeping at all. I tried to help as much as possible, but she insisted on doing everything her way. To my sister-in-law, the poor thing was suffering from severe postpartum depression. Who knows what state of mind she was in during those critical nighttime hours? To our pastor, we're all absolutely devastated, but especially Lucian, first losing his father and now his precious sons. Some families just seem cursed with tragedy. I was too numb with overwhelming grief to defend myself effectively at first. The medical examiner had preliminarily listed the cause of death as SIDS for both twins, noting that the risk was significantly higher for premature infants, especially twins. There would be toxicology reports, but those would take several weeks to complete. Lucian became like a ghost in our home. He took indefinite leave from work and spent his days staring blankly at walls or locked away in his home office. He barely spoke to me, as if looking at me was too painful a reminder of everything we'd lost together. Mila became increasingly clingy and fearful, having terrible nightmares, and asking constantly where her baby brothers had gone. I tried desperately to explain death in terms a 7-year-old could understand, but how do you explain something you yourself cannot possibly comprehend? Electra completely took over all funeral arrangements, consulting with Lucian but completely ignoring my input. She chose the tiny caskets, selected the flowers, designed the program, even picked out the outfits the twins would be buried in.
When I tried to participate to have some say in my own children's final journey, she would pat my hand condescendingly and say, "Don't worry yourself with these overwhelming details. You need to focus entirely on healing." The day before the funeral, I overheard Electra on the phone with her sister. Of course, Lucian is completely devastated, but perhaps this tragedy is for the best in the long run. Those boys were never quite right developmentally, and Ellie was clearly in way over her head. Now Lucian can start completely fresh, maybe with someone more naturally capable of handling motherhood. That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that Electra had never wanted the twins to survive and thrive. They were obstacles in her toxic relationship with her son, competition for his attention and affection, and living proof of his deep bond with me. Whether she had deliberately harmed them or simply neglected them when they desperately needed proper care, she was directly responsible for their deaths. But I had no concrete proof, just the word of a 7-year-old child, my own desperate maternal instincts, and this growing certainty that Electra had been systematically poisoning my precious babies. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and drizzly, absolutely perfect weather for the darkest day of my entire life. I stood in front of my closet, staring blankly at my clothes, completely unable to decide what someone wears to bury their own children. Finally, I selected a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to my grandmother's funeral several years earlier. Mila looked tiny and heartbreakingly lost in the black velvet dress Electra had purchased for her without bothering to consult me first. "Do I really have to go, Mommy?" she whispered as I gently brushed her hair. "I don't want to see Ethan and Eli in those scary boxes." "They won't really be in the boxes, sweetheart," I tried to explain, my voice cracking with emotion. "Just their physical bodies. The part that made them special, their spirits, isn't there anymore." Mila considered this seriously, her little forehead wrinkled in deep concentration. "Is that why Grandma Electra wasn't sad when she found them? Because she knew their spirits were already gone?" I froze completely, the hairbrush suspended in mid-stroke. "What do you mean, honey, about Grandma Electra not being sad?" "The morning you started screaming," Mila said in her small, innocent voice, "I woke up early and saw Grandma Electra going into the baby's room before you did. She looked at them in their cribs for a really long time, but she didn't pick them up or try to help them or call for anyone. She just watched them lying there, then went back to her room to change her clothes. Then you found them and started screaming." A cold wave of absolute horror washed over me. Had Electra known the twins were already dead before I discovered them? Had she deliberately left them for me to find in that devastating way?
Before I could ask Mila any more questions about what she'd seen, Lucian appeared in the doorway looking completely haggard and broken. "The funeral car is here," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "We need to leave right now." The funeral home was already packed when we arrived. Electra had invited extended family members, old friends, and even some of Lucian's business associates, turning what I had desperately wanted to be a small, intimate service into this massive public spectacle of grief. She positioned herself at the entrance like some kind of hostess at a dinner party, graciously accepting condolences from guests and directing people toward the guest book she had personally selected. The twins' caskets were positioned at the front of the room, heartbreakingly small and surrounded by elaborate flower arrangements I had never seen before. Photos of my babies were displayed on easels throughout the room, pictures taken exclusively by Electra, many of which I'd never even seen before. I moved through the crowded room like a complete ghost, mechanically accepting hugs and condolences from people I barely knew, while Lucian stayed glued to his mother's side, like always. The service was scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. sharp. At exactly 10:55, Electra efficiently gathered everyone to their seats, placing Lucian and me in the front row, with herself positioned on Lucian's other side and Mila sitting beside me.
Pastor Brian, the kind older man who had baptized Mila years earlier, stood solemnly before the tiny caskets, preparing to begin the service. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, Electra suddenly stood up and asked if she could say a few words first. The pastor nodded respectfully, stepping aside to give her the floor. Electra wore all black but with pearl earrings and a matching necklace that seemed inappropriately formal and attention-seeking. She faced the gathered mourners with an expression of perfectly practiced grief. "We are all gathered here today to bid farewell to two precious little angels taken from us far too soon," she began, her voice steady and controlled. "Ethan and Eli were beautiful boys who brought such joy during their brief time with our family. Their tragic passing is a devastating loss that no family should ever have to endure." She paused dramatically, looking directly at me with cold, calculating eyes. "But perhaps there is some divine purpose, even in such profound tragedy. Perhaps God, in his infinite wisdom, called these innocent souls home early because he knew exactly what kind of life awaited them here. Perhaps he knew what kind of mother they had been given and chose to spare them from future suffering." A collective gasp rippled through the entire room. Lucien went rigid beside me, but he remained completely silent. I sat there frozen in absolute shock, unable to believe what I was actually hearing. Had my mother-in-law just suggested at my own children's funeral that God had killed my babies to protect them from me? Electra continued, her voice now thick with manufactured emotion. "My precious son Lucien is a devoted father who would have given these boys absolutely everything they needed. But sometimes even everything isn't enough when other factors are tragically at play." Murmurs of agreement came from various family members throughout the room. I could see heads nodding, sympathetic looks being directed toward Lucien and Electra, while accusing glances were thrown directly at me. I desperately wanted to stand up, to scream, to defend myself against these horrible accusations. But complete shock and overwhelming grief had paralyzed me entirely. The room started spinning before my eyes, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might actually faint right there. Then I felt sudden movement beside me. Mila had slipped quietly from her chair and was walking purposefully toward the front of the room. Before I could stop her, she had reached Pastor Brian and was tugging insistently on his ceremonial robe. "Pastor Brian?" she said, her clear 7-year-old voice carrying perfectly in the sudden, complete silence. "Should I tell everyone what Grandma Electra put in the baby bottles every night?" The entire room went absolutely silent. Electra, who had been returning to her seat looking satisfied, stopped dead in her tracks, her face draining of all color instantly. Pastor Brian, clearly confused and caught off guard, knelt down to Mila's eye level. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked very gently. Mila looked back at me, then at her father, then directly at Electra with those innocent, truthful eyes. "Grandma Electra put white powder from her special medicine bottle into the babies' bottles every single night. She told me it would make them sleep like good babies forever. She said if she gave them enough of her special powder, they would sleep like angels and never wake up crying again." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Every single eye in the room moved slowly from Mila to Electra, whose face had gone from pale to completely ashen. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. "The child is obviously confused," she finally managed to say, her voice much higher than normal. "Children create elaborate fantasy stories when they don't understand real tragedy." But Mila wasn't finished speaking. "I'm not confused at all," she insisted with that direct honesty only children possess. I saw you do it, Grandma Electra. You made me promise never to tell Mommy. You said the white powder was your special secret recipe for making fussy babies behave properly. You said it would help them sleep like perfect little angels, and if I ever told anyone, nobody would believe me because I'm just a little girl.
A murmur ran through the gathered mourners like electricity. Someone in the back row stood up, a man in a dark suit I hadn't noticed before. "Mrs. Electra Richardson," he said, formally showing his badge. "I'm Detective Wilson with the Denver Police Department. I'd like to speak with you outside immediately, please." Electra's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. "This is absolutely preposterous," she declared, her voice shaking now. "I'm a grieving grandmother at my own grandson's funeral. I will not be subjected to these ridiculous accusations from a confused child." "Mila isn't confused, Mom," Lucian said suddenly, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the silent room. "She doesn't make up detailed stories like this." He turned to look at me directly for the first time since the twins died. "Did you know about this?" "I suspected something was wrong," I admitted, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "I found crushed pills in her room. The twins were always unnaturally drowsy. Mila had mentioned the powder before, but you didn't believe me when I tried to tell you." Electra suddenly bolted toward the exit, surprising everyone with her speed. But Detective Wilson was quicker, intercepting her before she could escape. Another plainclothes officer appeared from somewhere, and together they escorted a struggling, protesting Electra from the funeral home. The service dissolved into complete chaos. Some guests left immediately, others gathered in shocked clusters to whisper about what they'd just witnessed. Noah sat alone with his head buried in his hands, while Pastor Brian attempted to restore some kind of order to the devastating situation. I gathered Mila into my arms, holding her as tightly as I could. "You were so incredibly brave," I whispered into her soft hair. So brave, sweetheart." "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" she asked, her small voice worried and uncertain. "Grandma Electra said it was supposed to be our special secret." "No, baby," I assured her firmly. "You did something very, very right. You told the truth when it was scary and hard, and that's the bravest thing anyone can ever do." The twins' funeral was postponed indefinitely, an unprecedented situation that the funeral director handled with remarkable professional grace. The tiny caskets were moved to a private viewing room, and Pastor Brian promised to reschedule a proper service once this immediate crisis had been resolved. Detective Wilson asked Lucian and me to come to the police station to give formal statements. I held Mila's hand tightly as we walked into the sterile government building, the harsh fluorescent lights painful after the dim funeral home. "We'll need to interview your daughter as well," the detective explained gently. "Given her age, we'll have a child psychologist present, and one of you can stay with her throughout the entire process." Lucian hadn't spoken a single word since we'd left the funeral home. He sat in the waiting area staring blankly at the floor, his entire body rigid with shock and disbelief. "I'll stay with her," I said, not trusting Lucian's current mental state to be supportive for Mila. The interview room was specifically designed to be child-friendly, with bright, colorful walls and toys scattered around to help children feel comfortable. Dr. Reynolds, the staff psychologist, was a kind woman with a gentle voice who quickly established rapport with Mila. "Can you tell me about the baby's bottles?" she asked, after some preliminary conversation to help Mila relax. Mila looked at me for reassurance and encouragement. I nodded supportively, though my heart was breaking all over again. "Grandma Electra put medicine in them," Mila said simply and directly, "from her special bottle that she kept hidden." "How do you know it was medicine, sweetheart?" Dr. Reynolds asked carefully. "Because Grandma told me it was. She called it her special sleep medicine for fussy babies. She said the twins cried too much and needed help learning how to be good." "Did you see her put this medicine in the bottles many times?" Mila nodded vigorously. "Almost every single night. After Mommy went to bed, Grandma would take me to the kitchen and give me cookies if I promised to be really quiet. She would get the bottles ready for when the babies woke up hungry." "What did the medicine look like? Did it look like milk or was it different?" "It was white powder," Mila explained matter-of-factly.
Grandma would open her special bottle and shake the powder into the milk, then mix it up really good so it disappeared completely. Dr. Reynolds nodded encouragingly. "You're doing great, Mila. Did Grandma ever say anything else about the medicine? About what it would do to the babies?" Mila's expression grew serious and thoughtful. She said it would make them sleep like perfect little angels. And one night she said if they got enough of her special medicine, they would sleep forever and ever, and then she and Daddy and me could be a happy family without Mommy being sad and crying all the time. I gasped audibly, unable to contain my horror. Dr. Reynolds shot me a sympathetic look before turning back to Mila. "Mila, this is very important. Did you ever see Grandma give the babies more medicine than usual?" Mila thought carefully for a moment. "The night before they went to heaven, Grandma put extra powder in their bottles. I asked her why, and she said they had been especially fussy that day and needed extra help to sleep through the whole night without waking up." My hands were shaking so violently I had to sit on them. Electra had deliberately overdosed my babies. It hadn't been an accident or simple negligence. It had been completely intentional murder.
Meanwhile, in another interview room, detectives were questioning Electra. I would learn these details later through the investigation process. She initially denied everything completely, claiming Mila was either confused or had been coached by me to lie. But when presented with the prospect of toxicology reports that would reveal the complete truth anyway, her story began to change dramatically. "I only gave them a tiny bit of my sleeping medication," she eventually admitted to detectives, "just to help them sleep better. Ellie was so completely overwhelmed, and the babies cried constantly, day and night. I was trying to help everyone in the family get some desperately needed rest." But the evidence would tell a completely different story. A search warrant executed at her house revealed the unmarked pill bottle in Electra's room, which contained prescription-strength sleeping pills. Residue found in multiple baby bottles tested positive for the exact same medication. Most damning of all, our home security system, which Lucien had installed months earlier after a break-in at our neighbor's house, had cameras positioned in all the common areas, including the kitchen. Detective Wilson showed us the footage on his computer. There was Electra, night after night, methodically crushing pills into fine powder and mixing it into the twins' formula. The night before they died, the video clearly showed her adding significantly more powder than on any previous night. Lucien watched the security footage with a face like carved stone. When it ended, he walked out of the room without saying a single word, down the hallway and straight out of the police station. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. I had to stay strong for Mila and for the memory of my murdered sons. The toxicology reports confirmed exactly what the security videos had suggested. Both twins had lethal levels of the sleeping medication in their bloodstreams. The medical examiner officially changed the cause of death from SIDS to homicide by poisoning. Electra was formally charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The district attorney's office was confident they had an absolutely airtight case. The days that followed were a complete blur of police interviews, meetings with prosecutors, and preparations for a trial that would expose our family's tragedy to the entire world. Lucien returned home that first night, packed a single suitcase, and went to stay at a downtown hotel. He couldn't look at me, couldn't speak to me, couldn't bear to be in the house where his sons had died at his own mother's hands. A week after the funeral that never happened, Lucien finally came to talk. He sat across from me at our kitchen table, looking like he had aged 20 years in just a few days. "I should have believed you," he said simply, his voice completely raw with emotion.
You tried to tell me something was seriously wrong, and I dismissed you completely. I chose my mother over my wife and children, and now my sons are dead because of my blindness. I had imagined this conversation countless times during the past week, had rehearsed angry accusations and bitter recriminations in my mind. But faced with Lucien's genuine devastation, I found I couldn't summon the rage I'd expected to feel. We both failed them, I said quietly. I knew something was wrong. I should have done more, fought harder, taken them to the doctor despite your mother's interference. Lucien shook his head firmly. No, this is entirely on me and on her. You tried to protect them. I was willfully blind. I've been blind my entire life to what she really is. As the criminal case against Electra progressed, even more disturbing information came to light during the investigation. The prosecutor discovered that Electra had been treated for various serious mental health issues throughout her adult life, including delusional disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. She had been hospitalized twice in her 20s after becoming dangerously obsessed with men who had rejected her advances. Most shocking to Lucien was learning that his father hadn't actually died in a car accident when Lucien was 6 years old, as he'd been told his entire life. His father had simply left them, unable to cope with Electra's increasingly controlling and unstable behavior. She had created the elaborate story of his tragic death to explain his absence and ensure that Lucien would never try to find him. My entire life has been built on her lies, Lucien told me, his voice hollow and broken. Everything I thought I knew about my childhood, my father, my family history, all of it was completely fabricated to keep me emotionally dependent on her.
Lucien and I began seeing a grief counselor together, desperately trying to find some way through our shared trauma. The counselor recommended we also work with a marriage therapist, but I was deeply hesitant. The betrayal ran far too deep, the damage too severe and extensive. Lucien had chosen his mother over me at every single turn, had dismissed my legitimate concerns as paranoia, had left me to face her psychological warfare completely alone. Our innocent sons had paid the ultimate price for his willful blindness. Lucien's extended family completely fractured over the case. Some relatives absolutely refused to believe Electra was guilty, claiming she was being framed or that she had diminished mental capacity. Others were horrified by the truth and reached out to offer their support to both Lucien and me. His aunt Margaret, Electra's own sister, revealed that she had always worried about Electra's unhealthy relationship with Lucien, describing it as disturbingly possessive. "She couldn't stand it when Lucien found you," Margaret told me over coffee one afternoon. "She smiled and played the part at your wedding, but she was seething with rage inside. I once heard her say that no woman would ever be good enough for her precious son, and she would make sure that anyone who tried would live to regret it." As Electra's trial date approached, her defense attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that she suffered from severe mental illness and had never intended to actually kill the twins. The prosecutor refused, confident in the overwhelming strength of their evidence. Mila continued seeing Dr. Reynolds weekly, working through her trauma and confusion with professional help. She still had nightmares about her grandmother, often waking up screaming that Electra was trying to put medicine in her juice box. I would hold her until she calmed down, promising over and over that Grandma could never hurt her or anyone else ever again. The trial began on a cold February morning, 18 months after the twins had died. I sat in the courtroom gallery watching the woman who had murdered my sons enter in handcuffs and prison clothes, her once immaculate appearance now diminished and haggard.
The evidence against her was absolutely overwhelming. The security footage, the toxicology reports, Mila's testimony recorded on video to spare her the trauma of testifying in person, and even Electra's own partial confession left no room for reasonable doubt. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I stood before the court and looked directly at Electra for the first time since that horrible funeral. Ethan and Eli were only 3 months old. I began, my voice stronger than I had expected. They never had the chance to crawl, to walk, to say their first words. They will never start school, never fall in love, never experience the joy of having children of their own. Their lives were stolen, not by a stranger, but by someone who should have loved and protected them, their own grandmother. I spoke about who the twins had been in their brief lives, their distinct personalities already beginning to emerge. Ethan, slightly larger and more vocal, with intense eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Eli, quieter and more contemplative, with a smile that would light up whenever he heard his big sister's voice. The loss of any child is a pain no parent should ever endure. The loss of 2 children at the hands of someone you trusted creates a wound that will never fully heal. Every milestone they should have reached, every birthday they should have celebrated, every achievement they should have accomplished is now a moment of grief instead of joy. I looked directly at Electra one final time. I want to hate you for what you did. Part of me absolutely does. But mostly, I pity you. Your obsession with controlling your son's life cost you everything and cost my babies their lives. No punishment this court can impose will ever equal the punishment of living with what you've done.
The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Electra to 25 years to life, noting the particularly heinous nature of killing infants who had depended on her for their care. As Electra was led from the courtroom in shackles, she looked back once, not at me, but at Lucien, who sat in the row behind me. "I did everything for you," she called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everything I ever did was because I love you." Lucien's face crumpled with pain, and he walked out without responding. It was the last time I would see him for many years. Our divorce was finalized 6 months after the trial ended. Lucien moved across the country to start over, sending generous child support but maintaining only minimal contact with Mila through occasional phone calls and birthday cards. I understood his absence as an act of penance, his way of acknowledging that he had failed us all when it mattered most. Mila and I moved to a smaller city several hours away, somewhere without painful memories on every street corner. She started 2nd grade, made new friends, and gradually the nightmares became less frequent. We continued seeing a family therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, working through Mila's confusion and grief. I couldn't return to my graphic design career. The corporate world suddenly seemed completely meaningless after what we'd endured. Instead, I enrolled in law school, determined to use my experience to help other women facing family trauma, custody battles, and domestic psychological abuse. After graduation and passing the bar exam, I established a nonprofit organization called Voices for Truth, dedicated to providing legal support and advocacy for parents facing situations similar to what I had experienced. We offered resources, referrals, and direct representation for those who couldn't afford private attorneys. Mila grew into a perceptive, compassionate young woman with wisdom beyond her years. At 12, she asked if she could volunteer at Voices for Truth, helping with simple office tasks. "I want to help other kids whose grandparents are mean to them," she explained with that directness children possess.
7 years after finding my sons lifeless in their cribs, I stood before a state legislative committee, testifying in support of a bill requiring courts to take children's disclosures seriously, even when they implicated family members. My 7-year-old daughter tried to tell us what was happening, I explained to the committee. But like so many children, her warnings were dismissed as imagination. Had the adults listened, had we believed her, my sons would be alive today. The bill passed, becoming known as Ethan and Eli's Law, ensuring their brief lives would have lasting meaning in protecting other children. Have you ever had to stand up for the truth when everyone around you refused to listen? How did you find the courage to speak out when it felt like no one would believe you? Share your stories in the comments below, and remember, trust your instincts and never underestimate the power of a child's voice. Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to Revenge Girls, and share this video with someone who needs to know that their voice matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice may be delayed, but it's never denied when brave people speak up.